Everything we do is going to be about winning. Okay, we're going to learn to do things the right way, and that's the only way we're going to do them. Because if it doesn't help us, we're not doing it, man. That's just as simple as it gets. Win the Super Bowl.
That's
I
good.
mean it too. You know, one of the things that the only reason you become a head coach in this league, in my opinion, is to win. That's it. That's the bottom line. If you do it for any other reason, you're wrong.
Hey football fans, welcome to the Washington Command Center. Okay, so this video is an extension of a previous video. It's more Carson Wentz defense against some clowns that work at PFF, and I'm just here to say we got to have our dudes back in this new era of Washington football, an era where this proud franchise can once again command respect. And what better way to kick off this new era than subscribing here to the first, the real, the OG Washington Command Center, so you can find your way back to some of the most opinionated and ice cold calculated takes on all things Washington Commanders. While you're at it, ring that bell, hit that like button. It's free to do, and it means a lot. So, I don't know why I keep doing this to myself, but I watched another PFF podcast, and this time it was The Forecast with Dr. Eric Eager, and his co-host is this super arrogant asshole named George Chahoris or something, I don't know, who is legitimately my least favorite person at PFF. This is the one PFF show I usually avoid, even though I like Eager, because George's attitude just drives me nuts. And it's mostly a gambling focused podcast, so it's not worth me suffering through that and him just for, Eric Eager's stats and metrics. But Eager isn't escaping my wrath here either, because he was right there with George with his tears. And, this episode was quarterback tears, or tears, TEAR, like crying list. And I was curious to see if they had things different than, their coworker, Sam Monson. Well, I sat through this whole list waiting to hear about Carson, and they were breaking down their tiers and why they have guys where they do. And throughout, there are certain higher ranked quarterbacks, they make excuses for, like Lamar Jackson, who they had, in tier 2 and tier 3 respectively, because they both had two different tier lists. But they put a lot of that blame, and maybe rightfully so, on his wide receivers. But they seem to be taking rational looks about how the teams might be dropping or elevating guys. So I thought, hey, maybe they would have a better outlook on Wentz. Well, they got back to tier 3. I should say George did. And he had Dak and Stafford. And they explained that tier as guys that have shown elite ability at certain times when their situations were the best. But they hadn't shown it consistently enough to be in the top 2 tiers. So I was thinking, man, with how they describe it, Carson should be there in that tier. I mean, he had an MVP caliber season. The one time the team around him was not complete garbage. So I'm thinking he's got to be in that next tier at worst, especially with the season he had last year, where he showed some flashes of that special stuff here and there. Even with that god awful situation, he managed to throw 27 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions with no protection, and a serviceable but not great wide receiver. So the next tier comes and goes. No Carson Wentz. But what the hell? Jameis Winston and Jalen Hurts, but no Wentz. And then next tier, no Wentz. And that they had like last year's rookie class, even Justin Fields and maybe even Davis Mills, I think, in that. So we get to tier 7, and it's just George at this point because I think Eager only went up to 6, and George got, he went that far, and he says this next group, the tier 7, is the faint glimmer of hope guys. And he puts Trubisky and Goff and this year's rookie class, I think, in there. But no damn Wentz. So I'm fuming when he gets to tier 8. And that's what he says is the tier, spelt like crying, level. And finally, they describe it as the you're in tank mode, blow it up, and rebuild type quarterbacks. And he's got Mariota, Darnold, and Wentz all in the same category. And to me, that is absolutely ridiculous. First off, the weight of wins and losses used to elevate some quarterbacks while it's used to bring down others is complete garbage in this team sport, the way people look at it. It's crazy how it seems like everybody at this analytics company somehow has a former MVP contender at the bottom of the barrel, even though he was in the worst possible situation of any quarterback that finished in the top 15. By far, not even close. Like, Russ had it bad, but at least he had pass catchers like Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, a tight end like Gerald Everett, even Freddie Swain, who was his 4th guy, but was more productive than Zach Pascal. Wentz's wide receiver too. Wentz finished 9th and 11th in all of ESPN's quarterback metrics, the QBR, PAA, EPA, and he was a little bit worse in the NFL's QB rate at 13. Wentz was 10th in the league in touchdown passes, while having far and away the worst weapon, singular, because he only had one weapon in Michael Pittman. Not a bad player, but that was his only weapon, and he's really like a high-tier wide receiver too. He still managed to only throw 7 interceptions, which was top 5 least interceptions among actual starting quarterbacks that played more than 10 games. He's only just outside the top 10 in a lot of these grading metrics, according to the NFL, but well within the top half of the league. There's no reason he should be ranked in the 8th tier. He's being talked about like he's some kind of cannibal or leper, and it's just insane. Now, I'm going to try to make this my last Carson Wentz is a great quarterback video for a while, but I just want to show him or talk about him next to quarterbacks people are putting ahead of him or the guys he's close to as far as these metrics and where he's getting measured from the performance metrics from ESPN and the NFL. And you might agree with those, you might not, but I want to start by saying when Frank Reich came out after the trade and said Carson Wentz could be a top 10 quarterback, he was talking about a Carson Wentz that was between 9th and 13th best quarterback in the league with what little he had to work with Frank and Indy, according to those top metrics. Just look at the QBR, ESPN's metric, which takes into account all that a quarterback contributes to the game. Passing, rushing, penalties, and turnovers. Wentz was QB9 last season with just Michael Pittman. That was the only people ahead of him were Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Justin Herbert, Matt Stafford, Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, and somehow Ryan Tannehill. But he was ahead of Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Mac Jones, Tua, Jalen Hurts, Teddy Two Gloves, Matt Ryan, Daniel Jones, Heineke, Goff, Big Ben, Davis the Neck Mills, Baker Mayfield, Trevor Lawrence, Sam Darnold, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields. You get the idea. And then you look at PAA and EPA metrics. PAA measures the level of points he actually added himself over an average quarterback, and EPA is what he added above what he was expected to. And he moves back a little further to 11th there with Burrow and Dak jumping ahead of him. But with all those other quarterbacks I mentioned still behind him. Then, when you look at NFL passer rating metric, which is purely based on the passing performance of a quarterback, pretty black and white. Again, no context involving the team. Just a pure stats measurement. Wentz was a much more modest 13th quarterback in the NFL. Still top half of the league. And again, even within a horrible situation, his passing was still 13th best in the league. At 13th, he was behind Rodgers, Burrow, Dak, Kirk, Russ, Stafford, Brady, Kyler Murray, Jimmy G, and Pat Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and Teddy Bridgewater. But ahead of Derek Carr, Mac Jones, Josh Allen, Jared Goff, Matt Ryan, Tua, Tannehill, Neck Mills, Jalen Hurts, Lamar, Big Ben, Heineke, Danny Fumbles, Baker, Justin Fields, Darnold, Trevor Lawrence, and Zach Wilson. Now, even these measurements are measuring Carson's performance, and they have no context for how little support he had or how much more support the guys that graded above him had. When I defend Carson Wentz, first and foremost, I like to oppose this narrative that he was in some great situation in Indy. He was reunited with Frank Reich. Yippee. That probably didn't help him a ton when he had defensive ends in his lap as soon as he had the ball in his hand. Yes, a good run game does help a quarterback in different ways. Most directly probably by softening up coverages, which would be great if he had a pass catcher or more than one pass catcher to take advantage of that. He didn't. As I've said many times, he had one solid receiving option, Michael Pittman. So in most cases, even with 8 in the box, the defense can still neutralize the only decent guys got out there on the field, leaving Carson with nothing. Then this other thing the media goes to, I feel like, is a purposeful oversimplification of him having a great offensive line in Indy. That's complete bullshit from a quarterback standpoint. Yes, they were monstrous road graders going forward as run blockers. But standing their ground in pass pro, they were trash. 30th in the league. Trash. Not giving Carson much time at all to find an open receiver if he even had one. Now, I want to take a look at the quarterbacks that graded around him or the ones considered better than him. Like I said, I'm going to look at it from a QBR standpoint here, where he was 9th. Ahead of him, you had Rodgers, Brady, Mahomes, Allen, and Herbert. Those are 5 guys that were ahead of him, and I'm not even going to attempt to defend him with comparisons to them, even though their situations were all massively better than his, because those are the top guys in the league. And I'm not telling you that Carson Wentz is the best quarterback in the league. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he's better than a lot of these other guys, and he's going to be a top 10 kind of quarterback for us. I will say, though, I really think after seeing that stretch last season where the Chiefs went through a rough patch, that Mahomes just might be the more lucky or more blessed version of Carson Wentz. Their play styles are very similar, along with their arm talent and their crazy mentality. Mahomes' crazy shit just seems to work out more than, Wentz's. Maybe that's just Mahomes, or maybe that's having Kelsey and Hill. Guess we'll get to have a better idea of that this year now that he doesn't have Tyreek Hill anymore. But that aside, the QBR guys just ahead of Wentz are Tannehill, Kyler Murray, and I'm going to go ahead and pull Matt Stafford here. Tannehill was in the same boat as Wentz. Both had bottom of the league pass pro. Both had monster run games to lean on. But the difference between A.J. Brown and Michael Pittman is a huge one, along with the 10 games he got out of Julio. In those 10 games, he still got 430 yards, which was still more than Carson Wentz got out of Zach Pascal, his wide receiver too. And Julio in those 10 games demanded a lot more respect from defenses, making Tannehill's job a lot easier. Sort of like how Joe Burrow was able to get it done behind a horrible line because his weapons, like he just had more weapons. He didn't need to hold on to the ball that long. Carson just didn't have the protection or the caliber of wide receivers needed to overcome what he was putting up with, where some of these other guys did. Then Kyler Murray, whose support structure was exponentially better. He had way better pass protection. Then he basically had 2 Michael Pittmans, in my opinion, and Christian Kirk and A.J. Green, who are both around, I would say, Pittman's level. And then he also had 10 games with Nuke Hopkins. Then he had his Carson's old buddy, Zach Ertz, for 11 games. Plus Rondale Moore and James Conner at running back. That contributed. Those 2 guys, Moore and Conner, still outpaced Zach Pascal. So there's just no comparison between their support structures. And I know he's very talented. He's the former #1 overall pick with elite mobility and a cannon. But for Carson to only finish a few points behind him in QBR with the vast difference in support structure, I think that shows, Carson has quite a bit of ability. Then we got Matt Stafford, who I kind of pulled back here. He actually won a Super Bowl and finished with the 4th best QBR, which was 5 spots above Wentz. Now, I think Matt Stafford and Wentz have very, very similar attributes and abilities. Arm talent, mobility, along with very similar mentality and play style. They even have similar builds. I mean, Carson's a little taller, but I mean, they're kind of like the same guy. Honestly, comparing the two, I think you can make the argument that Wentz is more accurate. I mean, at least if you look at Stafford's first 5 years compared to Wentz's. I mean, they're kind of Wentz is throwing a better completion percentage. and he's a better decision maker. He's got less interceptions. And I think Stafford's success shows just how much a difference that quality wide receivers and really nothing else, what it makes like nothing else. There's nothing else that can replace the quality wide receivers. Like Stafford has gone from Megatron to Galladay to Cup. But when he got to LA, where he not only had that good receiving talent like he'd always had, on top of that, he got a top 10 pass protection unit and a defense that could cover up for any of his mistakes. He's the poster boy for what Wentz can be here in Washington. And honestly, I believe Carson Wentz can be an improved Stafford because he has better accuracy and he's a better decision maker. That might sound crazy, but come on. Look at the two of them, watch their play, then ask yourself, how much of an upgrade over Alshon Jeffrey was Megatron? And what's that upgrade worth? What about Galladay? He's an upgrade over Alshon Jeffrey. Then how much of an upgrade was Marvin Jones over Nelson Aguilar? Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Van Jefferson, OBJ. How big of an upgrade is that over Michael Pittman and Zach Pascal? 11th ranked pass pro unit versus the 30th ranked pass pro unit. I mean, Stafford has always had a far better situation. And I just think he makes the best case for why Carson Wentz can be a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. But from that, you got the guys that finished directly behind Carson in QBR. Russell Wilson and Dak Prescott. Russell was definitely in the same boat pass pro wise, like I said, but he had Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Gerald Everett, and like I said, Freddie Swain, who's more productive than Zach Pascal. I think the upgrade Wentz is going to get from Washington is way bigger than Russ is going to get from going to Denver. Russ's wide receiver group is going to be a lateral movement at best. Like, there's nothing that's has told me so far that Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton are going to be better than Lockett and Metcalf for him. And then they traded away the tight end that would have been the advantage to get him. So I really don't think he's getting an upgrade there. The offensive line, yes, it's an improvement, but it's kind of a marginal one. The defense, playing opposite of him, can be the biggest upgrade for him if they stick together without Fangio. And might be a bit of a hot take here, but I think some of us guys that weren't in favor of trading for Russ are going to be able to talk shit on the Wentz haters and that huge segment of Washington fans that wanted to trade away multiple first round picks for Russ. I think at the end of the year, it's going to be us that's like, see, aren't you glad? Then we go on to Dakota Prescott, who everyone has crowned as the best quarterback in the division, even though the QBR at least doesn't support that. I mean, just look at what Dak had. The second best pass pro unit in the NFL from what was the overall best offensive line. Then he had Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, both massively better than Pittman. I mean, who will argue that? Along with Ced Wilson and Michael Gallup, who's going to argue those guys aren't 10 times better than Zach Pascal? And those guys were better than him with 4 and 8 starts respectively. He also had a top 10 rushing attack to lean on. And on top of that, he had, really good tight end play from Dalton Schultz. With all that, Dak couldn't crack the top 3 MVP voting this year. And he lost in the wild card round of the playoffs with all that around him. Now, Wentz has never won a playoff game either. But Dan, he broke the top 3 in MVP with just 11 games before his injury. All he needed was 11 games to be top 3 in MVP voting. And he had nowhere near what Dak had. Now, Dak's lost a bunch of his important pieces, from that offense, while Carson has entered the best situation in his career here in Washington. I really think all these analysts need to go a little deeper than the surface when breaking down these quarterbacks and give a little more weight to the fact that this is a team game, and or at least be more consistent with how they're willing to make excuses for some guys while completely writing off others that are in far worse situations. I think there are going to be a lot of people singing a different tune at the end of this season, whether they're willing to admit it, that they may have been wrong about Wentz, or maybe, admit that he just had a bad supporting cast, or maybe, some people are going to strike up that old excuse parade. But nobody's going to be able to question Wentz or this team's viability or marketability when we roll into our Week 14 bye with at least 11 wins before coming home on Week 15 to a packed FedEx, kicking off this new era of Commanders football, an era where this proud franchise commands respect with a strong regular season and a deep playoff run. With Commander Carson at the reins, what better way to kick off than subscribing here to the Washington Command Center so you can find your way back to some of the most opinionated and ice-cold calculated takes on all things Washington Commanders. Remember to please leave a comment, hit that like button if you stayed this long. I love y'all. Peace.